Every morning at 4:30 a.m., before the city even thought about waking up, he was already in his kitchen, pouring black coffee into a chipped travel mug and checking flight statuses on his phone. He didn't need to do this. He had a corner office on the 28th floor, a driver who waited outside his building every weekday, and a schedule managed by 3 assistants. But lately, something had been gnawing at him, something he couldn't ignore no matter how many reports landed on his desk or how many polished presentations his team delivered. Passenger complaints were rising. Not about delays or mechanical issues, but about how people were being treated. Words like rude, dismissive, and humiliating kept appearing in feedback forms. At first, he chalked it up to the stress of post-pandemic travel. But then came the email from a retired schoolteacher who'd been turned away from her first-class seat because her cardigan looked too old. Another from a veteran who said a crew member laughed when he asked for help stowing his bag. Each message felt heavier than the last. So he made a decision, not as a CEO, but as someone who still remembered what it felt like to fly coach on a red-eye with a backpack and a bag of peanuts. He'd go undercover, not for a stunt, not for social media, just to see with his own eyes whether the values his airline once stood for were still alive or if they'd been buried under layers of corporate speak and performance metrics. He booked a first-class ticket under his mother's maiden name, something simple, untraceable unless you knew where to look. He chose a midweek flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, one of their busiest routes. Then he did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He packed his own bag. Just a small duffel, a change of clothes, his passport, and that same worn leather wallet he'd carried since college. He left the tailored suits behind. Instead, he pulled on faded jeans, a soft gray t-shirt, and a navy windbreaker he'd bought at an airport years ago. In the mirror, he looked like any other traveler, tired, ordinary human. At O'Hare, he walked through the terminal like he belonged there, which, in a way, he did. But no one recognized him. Why would they? His face wasn't on billboards anymore. He didn't do press tours. He preferred staying out of the spotlight, letting the airline service speak for itself. Or at least that's how it used to be. He arrived at the gate with 20 minutes to spare. The first-class line was already forming. Men in crisp shirts, women in designer sunglasses, a couple chatting about wine country. He stood quietly at the end, travel mug in hand, watching. The gate agent scanned tickets with a polite smile. No one questioned anyone's outfit. Not the man in flip-flops. Not the woman in yoga pants. Everything seemed normal. Then she appeared. The senior flight attendant, tall, immaculate in her uniform, hair pinned back like armor, stepped out from the jet bridge and began scanning the first-class group. Her eyes landed on him and paused, just for a second, but it was enough. She walked over, heels clicking against the tile, and stopped a few feet away. "Sir," she said, voice cool but loud enough for others to hear. "First-class passengers are expected to meet certain dress standards." He blinked. "I'm sorry?" She gestured toward his jeans. "This isn't appropriate for the cabin. We have guidelines." He pulled out his ticket and handed it to her. "It's a valid first-class booking." She glanced at it but didn't take it. "The ticket grants access, yes. But appearance is also part of the experience for everyone on board." "I'm sorry, but I can't allow you to board like this." A few people turned. Someone whispered. Heat rose in his chest, not from anger but from disbelief. He'd flown first class dozens of times in casual clothes, sweatpants even, back when he was building the airline from the ground up. No one had ever said a word, because it wasn't about the clothes. It was about respect. "I've flown this airline for 20 years, he said quietly. "Never once been told my outfit was a problem." She crossed her arms slightly. "Policies change. And as the senior crew member, I have the final say on cabin standards." He could have argued. He could have pulled out his ID, called his head of operations, made a scene. But that wasn't the point. The point was to see how a regular passenger would be treated. And right now he was being treated like a problem, like someone who didn't belong simply because he didn't look the part. So he stepped back. "All right," he said, voice steady. "I'll wait." She gave a tight nod and moved on as if she'd just handled a minor inconvenience. The other passengers boarded without a second glance. He watched them disappear down the jet bridge, their voices fading into the hum of the aircraft. Alone at the gate, he took a slow sip of coffee. It was cold now. He didn't mind. His mind was already working, not as an executive, but as someone who'd just been reminded how easily dignity could be stripped away with a few careless words. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "It's me," he said. "Gate B14, flight 422 to LAX. Tell me, do we actually have a dress code for first class?" A pause, then, "No, never have." "Where are you?" "Standing right where I'm supposed to be," he replied. "But someone decided I don't look like I belong." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. The silence on the other end said everything. As the plane's engines roared to life, he sat down on a nearby bench, watching the aircraft prepare for pushback. He wasn't angry. Not really. He was sad. Because this wasn't just about him. It was about every passenger who'd been made to feel small for not fitting someone else's idea of acceptable. And if this was happening here at his own airline, then the problem ran deeper than he'd feared, but he also knew something else. Change didn't start with memos or meetings. It started with moments like this. Uncomfortable, quiet human moments. And he was going to make sure this one mattered. He stayed at the gate until the flight was airborne. Then he stood, slung his duffel over his shoulder, and walked toward the customer service desk. Not to complain, not to demand, but to rebook on the next available first-class seat to Los Angeles. Same name, same clothes, same quiet determination. Because this wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The next flight wasn't for another 3 hours. He didn't mind. Time gave him space to think and to watch. From a corner seat near a charging station, he observed how gate agents interacted with passengers, how crew members moved through the terminal, how the rhythm of the airline flowed when no one thought they were being seen. Most of the staff were kind, efficient, even warm. But every now and then he caught a glance, a tone, a small moment of impatience that told a bigger story. It wasn't malice. It was something quieter, complacency, a belief that the rules applied differently depending on who you were or how you looked. He rebooked his ticket without fuss. The agent barely looked up as she processed the change. "Same class, same destination," she said, tapping keys. "You're all set for the 1:15. He thanked her and wandered toward a quiet cafe, ordering black coffee again, this time in a paper cup. He didn't check emails, didn't call anyone, just sat, listening to the murmur of travelers, the rolling of suitcases, the occasional child's laugh. It reminded him why he'd gotten into this business in the first place, not for profits or press, but for people. For the quiet magic of helping someone get from one place to another, safely and with a little kindness along the way. At 12:45, he walked back to the new gate, C-22. The same airline, same route, different crew. He wore the same clothes, same windbreaker, same jeans, same worn sneakers. If anything, he looked a little more tired now, his stubble a shade darker, his eyes carrying the weight of the morning. But he stood straight. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just wanted to see what would happen. This time, the boarding process felt different. The gate agent, a younger woman with a bright name tag and a genuine smile, scanned his ticket, nodded, and said, "First class, window seat." "Enjoy the flight." No hesitation. No side eye. Just service. He stepped onto the jet bridge, heart steady. Inside the aircraft, the cabin was calm, bathed in soft light. A flight attendant greeted him near the entrance. She was in her early 50s, with kind eyes and silver streaks in her hair pulled neatly into a bun. She took one look at him, then at his ticket, and smiled. "Welcome aboard," she said. "Let me show you to your seat." He followed her down the aisle. Plush seats, quiet murmurs, the faint scent of leather and coffee. Everything felt peaceful. She stopped at 1A, stowed his duffel in the overhead bin with ease, and offered him a warm towel and a bottle of water before he'd even asked. "First time in first class?" she asked gently. "No," he said, "but it's been a while." She nodded as if she understood more than he'd said. "Well, you're in good hands today." He settled in, watching her move through the cabin, checking on passengers, adjusting a blanket for an elderly man, laughing softly with a couple celebrating their anniversary. There was no performance in her actions, just care. Real, unscripted care. Then halfway through the pre-flight checks, the senior flight attendant from the earlier flight appeared at the front of the cabin. He recognized her instantly. Same crisp uniform, same rigid posture. She'd clearly been reassigned to this flight. Maybe as backup, maybe as punishment. Her eyes swept the cabin, landed on him, and froze. For a heartbeat, the air changed. She didn't say anything, didn't approach, but he saw it. The flicker of panic, the dawning realization that he hadn't disappeared. He was here, in first class. Again. And this time he was being treated exactly as he should be. She turned sharply and disappeared into the galley. Minutes later, the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm, professional. But as the plane taxied, the cockpit door opened slightly and the captain stepped out. He was in his late 50s with a weathered face and steady hands. His eyes found seat 1A immediately. He didn't smile, but he gave a small, respectful nod. They'd never met in person, but the captain knew who he was. Not from photos or press releases, but from a training session years ago, back when the CEO still visited flight simulators and sat in on crew briefings. The captain had remembered the quiet man who asked more questions than he gave orders. Now standing in the aisle, the captain paused just long enough to say, "Glad you could join us, sir." It was subtle, barely audible to anyone else, but it was enough. The senior flight attendant watched from the galley, gripping a tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. The flight took off smoothly. Lunch was served, seared salmon, roasted vegetables, a small dessert with real berries. He ate slowly, listening to the conversations around him. A woman talked about reuniting with her daughter after 2 years apart. A businessman quietly called his wife to say he'd be home in time for dinner. Nothing grand, just life, unfolding at 35,000 feet. Midway through the meal, the senior attendant approached his seat. Her voice was lower now, careful. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked. He looked up. "Just the truth," he said softly. "Did you really think I didn't belong here this morning?" She swallowed. I was following protocol. "There is no dress code," he said. "You know that now, don't you?" Her face fell. She glanced toward the front of the cabin as if hoping for rescue. "There was none. I was maintaining standards," she whispered. "Standards aren't about clothes," he said. "They're about how you make people feel." She didn't respond, just nodded, eyes down, and walked away. Later, during descent, he saw her sitting in the jump seat staring out the window. Not angry, not defensive, just small, like she just realized the weight of what she'd done, not just to him but to everyone she'd ever judged by their appearance. When the plane touched down in Los Angeles, he was one of the last to deplane. The kind flight attendant, the one with the silver streaks, walked with him to the exit. "You handled that with grace," she said, quietly. "I didn't do anything," he replied. "You didn't have to," she said. "Sometimes just showing up is enough." He thanked her and stepped into the terminal. The California sun was warm on his face. He pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls, 2 urgent emails, but he didn't open them yet. Instead, he walked to a quiet bench near baggage claim and called his head of human resources. "We need to talk," he said, "about culture, about respect, and about who we've allowed to define what first class really means." He paused, watching a family reunite a few feet away. Hugs, tears, laughter. "And we start tomorrow," he added. "With training, with listening, and with making sure no passenger ever feels unwelcome on our planes again." As he hung up, he realized something. He hadn't set out to catch someone making a mistake. He just wanted to understand. And in doing so, he'd reminded himself and maybe others of what really mattered. Not the seats, not the labels, but the way we treat each other when no one's watching. And that, he thought, was the true first-class experience. Back in his office the next morning, the city still waking outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, he didn't start with a memo or a meeting. He started with silence. He sat at his desk. No laptop open, no phone buzzing, and just thought about the faces from the flight. The young mother clutching her boarding pass like it was a lifeline. The older man who'd thanked the crew 3 times for helping him with his oxygen bag. And the flight attendant who'd stood rigid at the gate. Convinced she was upholding standards when she was really just guarding a gate no one had asked her to close. By 8 a.m., his assistant slipped a folder under his door. Inside were the personnel files of every crew member on both flights, the one that turned him away and the one that welcomed him home. He read them slowly, not looking for blame but for patterns. Tenure, training records, passenger feedback. The senior attendant had been with the airline for 12 years. Her file was clean on paper. No formal complaints, high performance scores. But buried in the notes from past supervisors were phrases like strict with standards and firm with passengers. He'd seen that kind of language before. It often meant someone was more focused on control than care. At 9:15, he walked into the training center unannounced. No fanfare. No announcement. Just him in the same windbreaker from the day before, standing in the back of a classroom where new flight attendants were learning safety protocols. The instructor didn't recognize him. Neither did the trainees. He listened as they practiced de-escalation techniques, cabin service flow, emergency procedures. Everything was by the book, precise, polished, rehearsed. But something was missing. Remember, the instructor said, first impressions matter. Passengers judge the entire flight by how you greet them. He raised his hand. Quietly. Like a student, yes? The instructor said, surprised but polite. What if the passenger doesn't look like what you expected? He asked. What if they're in jeans or tired or just human? The room went still for a beat. A few trainees exchanged glances. The instructor hesitated. We're trained to be professional regardless. Appearance shouldn't matter. But does it? He pressed gently. In practice, not in policy? No one answered. Not because they didn't know, but because they did. He nodded. Thank you. He left before anyone could ask who he was. By noon, he'd called an emergency leadership huddle, not in the boardroom, but in the crew lounge near the hangar. He wanted them surrounded by the real world of the airline. Lockers with family photos taped inside, coffee mugs labeled with nicknames, a bulletin board full of handwritten thank you notes from passengers. This wasn't a corporate exercise. It was a reckoning. When his team arrived, operations, customer experience, HR, they expected damage control. Instead, he handed each of them a printout, the email from the retired teacher, the veteran's note, and a transcript of his own boarding experience, written in plain language, no titles, no names. Read this, he said. Then tell me, is this the airline we say we are? Silence stretched. One executive cleared his throat. We've always prided ourselves on service. But service for who? He interrupted, not sharply, just honestly. Because if it only extends to people who look a certain way, wear certain clothes, or speak a certain tone, then we've lost our way. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't assign blame. But the weight of his words settled over the room like fog. Then he shared something no one expected, his own fear. I used to fly coach every month, he said, just to listen, to hear what real passengers were saying. Somewhere along the line, I stopped. And maybe that's on me, but that ends now. He announced 3 immediate changes. First, all discretionary appearance policies were suspended, effective immediately. There never was an official dress code for first class, but rumors and unwritten rules had taken root. Those were gone. Second, every frontline employee, gate agents, attendants, baggage handlers, would go through a new empathy-based refresher course, co-designed with veteran crew members known for their kindness, not just their efficiency. Third, he'd be flying anonymously once a month, not as a spy but as a passenger, just to stay connected. But the biggest move came that afternoon. He asked to meet the senior flight attendant, not in a disciplinary office, but in a quiet conference room with sunlight and water bottles. She walked in pale, hands clasped tight. She expected termination, maybe even a public statement. Instead, he offered her a chair. I'm not here to fire you, he said. I'm here to understand. She looked up, startled. Why did you do it? He asked. Not the policy part, the judgment. What made you decide I didn't belong? She hesitated. Then quietly, I've seen people take advantage. Show up in gym clothes, act entitled, demand upgrades they didn't pay for. I thought I was protecting the experience for others. But did you ask? He said. Did you check the ticket first, or did you decide before you even looked? She looked down. I saw the jeans, the backpack. I assumed. Assumptions are expensive, he said gently. They cost us trust. They cost us people. She nodded, eyes glistening. I didn't mean to humiliate anyone. I believe you, he said. But impact matters more than intent. He told her she wouldn't be fired, not yet. Instead, she'd be temporarily reassigned to ground training, working alongside new hires, sharing her experience. Not as a warning, but as a lesson. Help us rebuild what got lost, he said. If you can. She left the room quieter than she'd entered, but not broken. Just changed. That evening he sat alone in the empty training simulator, the cockpit dark around him. He thought about the kind attendant with the silver streaks, how she'd treated him like a person, not a problem. He made a note: find her, thank her, maybe ask her to lead the new training sessions. Because real change didn't come from punishment. It came from people choosing every day to see each other clearly. And sometimes all it took was one moment, one wrong call at a gate, to remind everyone what was at stake. He turned off the lights and walked out into the cool night air. Tomorrow the new training would begin. Not with rules, but with stories. With listening. With the simple, radical idea that every person who buys a ticket, no matter what they wear, deserves to feel like they belong. And this time, he'd be in the back of the room, learning right alongside them. 2 weeks after the flight, the airline's training hangar buzzed with a different kind of energy. Gone were the stiff rows of chairs and robotic role plays. In their place were small circles of crew members, some veterans, some fresh hires, sitting on mismatched stools, coffee cups in hand, talking. Not reciting scripts, not practicing customer recovery steps, just talking. About moments they'd felt proud, moments they'd regretted, times they'd been judged and times they'd misjudged someone else. He stood near the back, arms crossed, watching. He wasn't leading the session. He'd asked the attendant with the silver-streaked hair, the one who'd welcomed him without question, to co-facilitate. She'd hesitated at first. "I'm not management," she'd said. But he'd smiled and told her, "That's exactly why we need you." Now she stood in the center of one circle, holding a worn notebook. "Last year," she said, voice calm but clear, "a man boarded in a hospital bracelet and slippers. His wife had just passed. He was flying home alone for the funeral. I almost stopped him. He looked disheveled, like he hadn't slept in days. But I didn't, I just asked if he needed anything. He cried, said no one had asked him that in a week." She paused. "That's the job. Not policing clothes. Not guarding status, just seeing people." A young attendant in the circle nodded slowly. "I turned away a woman last month because her nails were chipped and her bag was from a discount store. She had a first-class ticket. I thought she must have scammed it. She never said a word, just walked away. I still think about her." Silence followed. Not awkward. Heavy with understanding. This was the heart of the new training. Honesty over perfection. Mistakes weren't hidden here, they were shared, examined, learned from. No blame. Just growth. He stepped forward then, not as a boss, but as someone who'd also gotten it wrong. By disappearing for too long. By trusting reports more than real voices. "I flew first class in jeans," he said simply. "And someone told me I didn't belong." That moment hurt, but it also woke me up. He didn't reveal who he was, not yet. Most still thought he was a consultant, maybe a customer experience lead, and that was fine. He wanted them to speak freely, not carefully. Later that day, he met with the senior attendant, the one who'd blocked him at the gate. She'd spent the past 10 days sitting in on these sessions, listening more than speaking. Today, she raised her hand during a discussion about bias. "I used to think I was being professional," she said, voice quieter than before, "but I was really just protecting my own idea of what first class should look like. Like it was a club, not a service. I forgot that dignity isn't earned by what you wear. It's given because you're human." No one interrupted. No one scoffed. Because they'd all been there in small ways or big. After the session, she approached him. "I've been thinking," she said. "What if we created a passenger perspective module, where crew spend a day as travelers, booking, waiting, boarding, so they remember what it feels like?" He smiled. "That's brilliant. You should lead it," she blinked. "Me? You lived it," he said. "That gives you more authority than any title." Meanwhile, word of the changes began rippling through the airline. Not through press releases, but through crew chatter, passenger whispers, even social media, though carefully, respectfully. A traveler posted a photo of a handwritten note they'd received on board. "Thank you for flying with us. However you arrived today, tired, joyful, grieving, hopeful, you belong here." It wasn't branded. No logo, just words. It went quietly viral among frequent flyers. Back in operations, the data started shifting too. Complaints about attitude or unfair treatment dropped by 38% in 3 weeks. Not because problems vanished overnight, but because people felt seen, and staff felt trusted to do the right thing, not just follow a script. One evening, he took a red-eye from Denver to Atlanta, again undercover. Same jeans, same windbreaker. This time he booked coach. He wanted to see if the change reached beyond first class. The flight was full. A crying baby, a delayed departure, a broken overhead light. Chaos, the kind that tests patience. But the crew moved through it with calm grace. When a passenger snapped at a young attendant for spilling water, the lead crew member didn't scold or defend. She just handed the passenger a fresh napkin and said, "Long day, huh? Mine too. Let's get through it together." He watched, heart full. At one point, the same young attendant who'd admitted turning away the woman with the discount store bag walked past his seat. She paused, not recognizing him, and offered him an extra blanket. "Looks like you could use it," she said with a tired but genuine smile. He thanked her. And in that moment, he knew the shift wasn't just policy, it was personal. It was real. When he landed in Atlanta at 5 a.m., he didn't head straight to a hotel. He went to the crew lounge near the tarmac, where night shift attendants were grabbing coffee before heading home. He bought a round, sat with them, listened as they talked about passengers who'd made their day. A thank you note, a shared joke, a quiet, "You're doing great" during turbulence. No one knew who he was. And for the first time in years, he didn't want them to, because the work wasn't about him. It was about restoring something simple, the belief that flying shouldn't make you feel less than. That kindness isn't a luxury, it's the baseline. As dawn broke over the runway, he walked back to his rental car, the sky turning soft pink. He thought about the senior attendant, now helping design training instead of enforcing invisible rules. The veteran crew member, now a voice of wisdom. The young staff learning that service isn't about control, it's about connection. He got in the car, started the engine, and drove toward the hotel. But he wasn't thinking about rest. He was already planning the next step, inviting real passengers, regular people, not influencers or VIPs, to sit in on training sessions, to share their stories directly, because change sticks when it's human. And this airline, he believed, was finally remembering how to be one. 3 months later, on a rainy Tuesday in Seattle, a woman in a faded raincoat and worn sneakers walked up to the first-class check-in counter. Her hair was damp, her hands full of a tote bag and a boarding pass printed on wrinkled paper. She'd just come from visiting her son in the hospital. Nothing serious, just a broken arm, but the day had worn her thin. She hadn't had time to change, hadn't even thought about it. All she wanted was to get home. The agent behind the counter looked at her ticket, then at her face, and smiled. "Welcome back," she said warmly. "Your seat's ready. Would you like a hot tea before boarding?" The woman blinked, surprised. "That's very kind, thank you." No questions about her clothes. No hesitation. Just care. A few rows away, he watched from a quiet corner near the lounge entrance. He wasn't undercover this time. He wasn't hiding. But he wasn't announcing himself either. He was just there, observing the quiet ripple of what had started with one wrong call at a gate. The airline hadn't issued a grand statement. There were no viral videos or staged apologies. The change had spread the old-fashioned way, through people choosing every day to do better. And it showed. In the months since, the training sessions had grown. Real passengers, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, retirees now came in monthly to share their travel experiences. Not as critics, but as guests. Crew members listened, asked questions, sometimes cried. And slowly, the idea of first class began to shift, not as a tier of luxury, but as a standard of humanity that applied to every cabin, every passenger, every flight. He'd also made a quiet rule for himself: no more corner office lunches. Twice a week, he ate in the crew cafeteria, sat with gate agents, baggage handlers, new hires, listened more than he spoke, learned that the woman who'd turned him away had started a mentorship program for new staff, focused on bias awareness. Learned that the kind attendant with the silver streaks had been promoted, not to management but to lead of passenger experience, a role created just for her. And the data? It spoke softly but clearly. Passenger satisfaction scores and staff courtesy had climbed to their highest in 8 years. Internal surveys showed crew morale up, turnover down. But the real proof wasn't in numbers. It was in moments like this one on a rainy afternoon, in a busy terminal where a tired woman was treated like she mattered, simply because she existed. He boarded the same flight, not first class this time, but coach. He wanted to feel the full arc of the journey. The plane was full. A family with 3 kids, a group of construction workers heading home, a student with headphones and a backpack full of books. No one looked perfect, and no one needed to. As the flight attendants came through with drink orders, one paused at his row. She was new, maybe 6 weeks on the job, but her eyes were steady, her tone warm. "Long day?" she asked, noticing the lines on his face. He nodded. "But better now." She smiled, handed him a water, and moved on. No fanfare, just presence. Midway through the flight, turbulence hit, light but enough to rattle nerves. A child whimpered. An older man gripped his armrest. Without being asked, 2 attendants moved through the cabin, not just checking seatbelts but offering quiet reassurance. "We're okay," one said gently to the child. Just the clouds saying hello. He watched, heart full. This was it. Not perfection, not performance. Just people caring for people. When the plane landed, he didn't rush off. He waited until most had deplaned, then walked slowly toward the front. The lead attendant, the one who'd welcomed him months ago, was by the exit saying goodbye to passengers by name, thanking them for flying. She saw him. Didn't gush, didn't bow, just met his eyes and gave a small, knowing nod. "You stayed," he said. "We all did," she replied. Later that evening, back in his office, he opened a plain envelope that had been left on his desk. Inside was a handwritten letter from the senior attendant who'd once blocked him at the gate. "I used to think my job was to protect the cabin from the wrong kind of people. Now I know it's to welcome every kind of person into it. Thank you for not giving up on me, and on us." He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, next to the retired teacher's email and the veteran's note. Not as trophies, as reminders. The next morning, he sent one final instruction to his team. Remove the phrase "first-class experience" from all internal documents. Replace it with "human experience" because dignity wasn't a perk. It was the point. He still flew anonymously sometimes, not to catch mistakes but to witness the quiet magic of ordinary kindness in motion. And every time he boarded, no matter what he wore, he was met with the same thing. A smile, a nod, a simple "welcome." No one knew who he was. And that was exactly how it should be, because the best service doesn't announce itself. It just shows up steady, kind, and human when it's needed most, and in the end, that's all any of us really want, to be seen, respected, and allowed to belong, exactly as we are. 6 months after that first rainy day in Seattle, something unexpected happened. Not inside a boardroom or on a balance sheet, but in the quiet corners of terminals across the country. Passengers started noticing. Not in a loud, flashy way, but the kind of noticing that sticks. A gate agent remembering your name from a flight 2 months ago. A flight attendant quietly swapping your cold coffee for a fresh one without being asked. A simple, "You okay?" offered to someone sitting alone with tired eyes. It wasn't magic. It was consistency. The kind that only grows when people feel trusted, seen, and reminded, daily, that their work matters beyond checklists and KPIs. He didn't take credit for it. He never did. But he watched, quietly proud, as the culture he'd helped nudge back on track began to breathe on its own. The training sessions were now run entirely by crew members, rotating teams from different bases, sharing real stories, not scripts. New hires didn't just learn how to serve champagne. They learned how to listen when someone's voice cracks while asking for a blanket. They practiced reading silence as much as speech. One afternoon, he found himself in a small airport in Ohio, waiting for a connecting flight. He'd taken a red-eye from the West Coast, his shirt wrinkled, stubble thick, eyes heavy with travel fatigue. He hadn't planned to fly that day. He was supposed to be in meetings, but a last-minute family matter pulled him away, and he'd grabbed the first seat available. "Coach, middle seat, 6 a.m. departure." As he shuffled toward the gate with his duffel slung over one shoulder, he braced himself for the usual rush, the impersonal scan and go. But when he reached the front, the gate agent, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read L. Chen, looked up, recognized his frequent flyer number, and smiled. "Rough morning?" she asked. He nodded. "You could say that." She tapped a few keys, then leaned in slightly. I just moved you to 3A, window, extra legroom, no charge. You look like you could use the space. He was too tired to argue. Thank you, he said genuinely. No problem, she replied. We've all been there. It wasn't special treatment. It was human treatment. And that made all the difference. On board, the flight was short, just under 2 hours, but full. A businessman scrolling through emails, a grandmother with knitting needles, 2 teenagers whispering and laughing over shared earbuds. The crew moved through the cabin with calm efficiency, but also with warmth. When the grandmother dropped a ball of yarn, an attendant didn't just hand it back. She knelt, helped wind it, and asked about the scarf she was making. For my granddaughter's birthday, the woman said, eyes lighting up. She's turning 10. Tell her happy early birthday from us, the attendant said, tucking the yarn into her seat back pocket. Moments like that didn't make headlines, but they stitched together something stronger than policy. Trust. Later, during descent, he overheard a conversation behind him. A man was telling his seatmate, I flew this airline last year and it felt cold, like you were just a ticket number. But today, felt like I mattered. His seatmate nodded. Yeah, like they actually see you. That was the shift. Not perfection, because travel is messy, people are tired, systems break, but a return to intention. To the idea that service isn't about flawless execution, but about showing up with your humanity intact. Back at headquarters, the changes had taken root deeper than anyone expected. The Human Experience Initiative, once a quiet experiment, was now embedded in hiring, training, even performance reviews. Promotions weren't just based on efficiency scores, but on peer nominations for empathy, patience, and grace under pressure. One young attendant in Dallas had been recognized for staying with a passenger who had a panic attack mid-flight, holding their hand until they could breathe again. Another in Miami had rebooked an entire family, free of charge, after their connecting flight was canceled, even though it wasn't technically required. They had a wedding to get to, she'd said simply. What else was I going to do? He made sure those stories were shared, not as PR, but as compass points. Reminders of who they wanted to be. But the real test came on a cold December evening in Chicago. A massive snowstorm grounded dozens of flights. Terminals filled with frustrated, exhausted travelers. Delays stretched into double digits. Meals ran out. Patience wore thin. In past years, this would have been chaos. Shouting matches, social media meltdowns, viral videos of staff snapping under pressure. Not this time. Instead, something quiet and powerful unfolded. Crew members brought in blankets from storage. Gate agents handed out their own snacks. Supervisors walked the concourse with hot coffee, apologizing sincerely, offering real updates. Not corporate speak, but honest timelines. One attendant even set up a makeshift story corner for stranded kids, reading picture books aloud while parents tried to rebook flights. And in the middle of it all, he stood near a charging station watching, not as a CEO, just as another stranded passenger waiting like everyone else. A young mother with a sleeping toddler on her lap caught his eye. She looked overwhelmed, bags at her feet, phone dying, no seat left. Without thinking, he picked up his own carry-on and moved to a standing spot near the wall. Take my seat, he said gently. She looked up, surprised. Are you sure? Positive, he said. She mouthed, thank you, and sank into the chair like it was a gift. Later, as the storm cleared and flights began resuming, he boarded his own delayed plane. The cabin was tense but calm. No one was happy, but no one was cruel. And the crew? They moved like anchors in a storm, steady, present, unshaken. During the safety demo, the lead attendant paused before the final line. Instead of the usual, we're glad you chose us, she said. We know today wasn't easy. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for treating each other and us with kindness even when it was hard. A few passengers clapped softly, not out of obligation but gratitude. When the plane landed past midnight, he walked through the nearly empty terminal, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. He passed a crew member sitting alone on a bench, still in uniform, eating a cold sandwich. She looked up, recognized him, not from fame, but from a training session he'd quietly attended weeks earlier, and gave a small wave. He sat beside her. Long day? The longest, she admitted, smiling tiredly. But worth it, why's that? She thought for a moment. Because today I didn't just move people from A to B. I helped someone feel seen. That's why I got into this. Almost forgot that for a while, he nodded. Me too. They sat in silence for a few minutes, two tired humans in a quiet airport, sharing space without needing to fill it with words. The next morning, he called a small meeting, not with executives, but with the frontline leads from 5 major hubs. No agenda, just a question. What do you need to keep this going? Their answers weren't about budgets or tech. They were about time, about being allowed to pause, to connect, to not rush through every interaction like it was a transaction. Give us 5 extra minutes between flights, one said. Let us actually look people in the eye. He approved it on the spot. Over the following weeks, those 5 minutes became sacred. Not wasted time, but invested time. Time to ask how someone's day is going. Time to notice when a passenger is struggling and offer help before they ask. Time to remember that behind every ticket is a story, a reason, a life in motion. And slowly, something beautiful happened. Passengers started paying it forward. Notes left in seat pockets. Compliments written directly to crew members by name. A man once left a $20 bill and a note that read, "For your next coffee break, you earned it." Another passenger, after seeing an attendant calm a crying child, sent a care package to the crew's base. Cookies, hand cream, and a card that said, "You're doing holy work." None of it was required. None of it was tracked. It just grew. One evening, as he packed for a weekend trip, just a small bag, no entourage, no special requests, he paused in front of his closet. He reached for the same navy windbreaker he'd worn on that first flight. It was a little more faded now, a small tear near the hem he'd never bothered to fix. He put it on. His assistant, watching from the doorway, smiled. "Still wearing that?" "Best reminder I've got," he said. "Of what?" She didn't ask. But she knew, because the real lesson hadn't been about dress codes or first-class seats. It had been about belonging, about the quiet truth that no one should ever have to prove they're worthy of kindness, especially when they're already carrying so much. As he walked through the airport the next morning, no one recognized him. No one bowed. No one even glanced twice. And that was perfect. He boarded his flight, found his seat, and buckled in. The attendant came by, offered a warm towel, asked if he'd like water or juice. He chose water. She smiled, moved on. Outside, the engines hummed to life. The plane rolled down the runway, lifting into a clear blue sky. And for the first time in a long time, he felt not like a CEO, not like a leader, but like a passenger, just one of many, heading somewhere, carrying his own quiet story, treated not as a status but as a person. That, he thought as the clouds drifted below, was the only standard that ever really mattered.